The sun burned through the thin dust that hung in the air over Redridge's main street. Every building along the road leaned slightly, worn by years of wind and sun. The wood cracked and faded. Caleb Thorne's horse clopped steadily against the dirt, hooves kicking up small clouds that drifted lazily toward the wooden sidewalks. He held the reins loosely, alert to every movement around him. His jaw was tight, eyes scanning the street for signs of trouble. A newcomer could be noticed and tested quickly in a town like this. He felt it immediately, the weight of watching eyes. People peeked from behind doors, children paused mid-step, and a few grown men leaned on fence posts, arms crossed, waiting. Caleb's stomach tightened, a small knot of anticipation he hadn't felt in years. It wasn't fear, exactly, but a readiness, a calculation of what might come first: confrontation, challenge, or quiet observation. At the far end of the street, the Silver Spur saloon exhaled the smell of whiskey, sweat, and tobacco. The piano played softly, keys uneven but steady, blending with a low hum of conversation. Candlelight flickered through the windows, catching the dust and casting long shadows on the floorboards. Caleb's eyes were drawn to the movement inside. She was singing. Isabella Bella Marquez moved across the saloon floor with deliberate confidence, her boots scuffing lightly against the worn wood, skirt brushing the floor. She wasn't trying to hide. Her shoulders were back, her posture sharp. Her voice was clear, steady, cutting through the low murmur of the room without effort. Her dark eyes met his for a fraction of a second, and he felt the weight of the town's judgment behind her gaze. He tightened his grip on the reins, noticing the tension in his shoulders. A man sneered from the side of the room, muttering under his breath about her heritage. Caleb's chest tightened, not from anger, exactly, but a cold, focused awareness. He had faced violence before. He knew it when it might erupt, and he also knew the cost of letting it slide. His decision was immediate, unhesitating. He moved closer, boots crunching on the dirt, eyes steady on the deputy who had spoken. "Keep your mouth shut," Caleb said, voice low but carrying over the dusty street. The deputy froze mid-smirk, his gaze flicking between Caleb and the woman he had insulted. The tension in the air tightened. Caleb's hand rested near his gun, not in threat, but in readiness. He could sense Bella's relief before she even looked at him. He felt it in her posture relaxing slightly, her hand falling away from the bar. Caleb dismounted, the leather of his boots creaking as they hit the wooden sidewalk. He surveyed the town in one slow sweep, the peeling paint of the general store, the shutters barely hanging on the windows, the little girl gripping her mother's hand and staring at him wide-eyed. There was fear in some faces, curiosity in others, and a calculated wariness in those who thought they could intimidate him. He filed each reaction silently, noting who might be an ally, who might be a threat. He noticed Bella moving off the stage between songs, adjusting her shawl. Her hands were steady, but he could see the tension in her fingers, the slight stiffening in her posture. He understood that tension. He had carried it for years, always alert, always ready to protect, always counting the cost of every interaction. A small stir came from the crowd. Someone whispered loudly enough to catch Caleb's ear. "She shouldn't be allowed to sing here." Caleb's hand clenched briefly at his side, and he made a decision. Not with words, but with presence. He stepped closer to her, moving between the insult and her, exuding authority without yelling, without making a scene. Bella's eyes found his, and in that silent exchange, something passed between them, a recognition that he understood danger and that he would meet it head-on, that he would act when others only watched. She straightened, just enough to give him a subtle nod. Caleb scanned the room again, noting every exit, every person who might move quickly if things escalated. His heart rate had lifted slightly, not from fear, but from the surge of focus that came before action. He was ready to step into a confrontation if it came, but he also felt the pull of curiosity toward the woman who had held the room's attention with nothing but her voice. There was empathy there, a need to protect, and a flicker of something else he hadn't felt in years. Interest, quiet and careful, dangerous because it had to remain restrained. He stayed, shoulders squared, eyes calm, waiting. Every movement in the saloon was measured through his gaze, every flicker of candlelight across a face catalogued for its intent. And through it all, Bella's song continued, unwavering, as if she already knew someone in the room could, and would, see her as more than gossip, more than a target, more than the prejudice that clung to the town like dust. The alley behind the Silver Spur Saloon was narrow, dark, and smelled of damp hay and refuse. Lanterns hung from hooks on the wall, swaying slightly in the warm night wind. Caleb moved silently, boots pressing against the uneven cobblestones, every step deliberate. His eyes scanned every shadow, every corner. He could feel the tension in his chest, tight but controlled, the familiar readiness that had carried him through more danger than he wanted to remember. Bella's hand brushed against the brick wall as she hurried down the alley, skirt lifted just enough to avoid the mud. She paused, hearing footsteps behind her, and instinctively tucked closer to the wall. Her heart thumped in her chest, not from running, but from the sudden awareness that she was being followed. She knew the men in the saloon who had been whispering about her heritage weren't done. Their sneers were still fresh in her mind. Caleb stepped from the shadows without a sound. His presence was immediate, commanding. He caught her eye and nodded, a silent reassurance, and she felt her shoulders relax just enough to let him guide her forward. A group of 3 men emerged from the corner, blocking the far end of the alley. Their faces were lit by the dim lantern glow, eyes sharp with amusement and menace. Caleb's hand hovered near his holster, not yet drawing, his eyes calculating distance, angles, and possible escape routes. His mind ran through options in fractions of a second: fight, flee, distract. He knew he had to protect her, but he also knew any rash move could escalate the situation. "Evening, Bella," one of the men said, his voice low and mocking. "Thought you'd be safe in the shadows." Bella swallowed, gripping the folds of her skirt. She felt the familiar surge of anger rising, but it was tempered by the fear that had her stomach coiled tight. She didn't want to provoke them. She had survived this long by being careful, but the reflex to stand her ground was too strong to ignore. Caleb shifted slightly in front of her, placing a hand lightly near her arm. The contact was brief but steadying, and Bella felt a small measure of relief as it grounded her. "You should step back," he said evenly, voice quiet but sharp, carrying authority that brooked no argument. The men laughed, but it was tense. One stepped closer, smirking, and Caleb adjusted his stance, feet solid, shoulders squared, eyes locked on the nearest threat. He felt his chest tighten, not with fear, but with a surge of protective instinct. He knew the odds weren't in their favor if a fight broke out, but retreat wasn't an option. His mind traced every possible outcome, every movement necessary to keep them both safe. Bella's pulse raced, not just from fear but from the proximity of him. Her shoulder brushed against his as she shifted to move backward. The contact was accidental, but it sent a current through both of them they couldn't ignore. She felt a flutter of tension, awareness of him, of the heat in his body, the calm in his presence. His hand hovered near her arm again, protective, unspoken. She couldn't look away, couldn't speak, and for the first time, she realized how much she wanted his assurance in this dangerous place. One of the men lunged suddenly. Caleb reacted instantly, stepping between them, voice firm and controlled, "Back off." His hand went to his gun, slow and deliberate, a motion meant to assert readiness without panic. The attacker paused, calculating whether to test him further. The seconds stretched, tight with possibility. The pause was enough. Caleb gave Bella a quick, tense nod toward the far end of the alley. "Now," he whispered. They moved together, slipping past the men who hesitated, caught off guard by his composure and precise movements. Their feet pressed against the uneven stones, and Caleb's eyes never left the shadows, every muscle coiled for action. Once the alley bent away from the street and the men's shouts faded, Caleb stopped, hand still near his gun. Bella exhaled, releasing tension she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Her back was against the wall, shoulders pressed tight, and she looked at him, dark eyes wide. "You okay?" he asked quietly, voice low, careful. She nodded, even though her chest was still racing. I think so." Caleb's gaze lingered on her, evaluating, protective. "You're stronger than they give you credit for," he said. Not a compliment, not exactly, but a statement of fact. His hand brushed against her arm again, just the slightest touch, before dropping to his side. It was grounding, familiar, a silent acknowledgement that he would keep her safe, that she could rely on him. Bella felt a rush of warmth, not fear, not desire exactly, but the clarity that came with trust in someone who would not falter. Her mind traced the alley behind them, the possible paths forward, and the choices Caleb had made without hesitation. She could feel the weight of his decision-making, the quiet authority that made the danger feel manageable. "Thank you," she said, voice barely above a whisper. Not for the words themselves, but for the certainty behind them. Caleb gave her a small nod, eyes scanning the street beyond the alley. "Keep moving. Stay close. I'll get us clear." They slipped down the alley together, quiet, alert. Every step measured. Every shadow considered. And in that silence, a connection began to form, fragile, charged, and unspoken, built on survival, awareness, and the shared understanding of danger. The desert stretched endless, flat and harsh, under a sky darkening toward dusk. The heat from the day had softened but left the air heavy and dry, filled with the faint scent of sand and sun-baked sagebrush. Caleb guided his horse with steady hands, scanning the horizon for any movement. Behind him, Bella rode with careful attention to every sound, the creak of a saddle, the wind shifting, the distant cry of a coyote. Caleb's chest was tight, not from exertion, but from the constant alertness required in situations like this. The deputy's men could be following, waiting for a mistake. Every instinct told him to stay calm, conserve energy, and keep both of them safe. He noticed the tension in Bella's shoulders, the way she gripped the reins a little too tightly. He understood that tension. He had carried it in himself for years, the same tight knot that kept a man alive in the open, dry, and lawless spaces. "You riding okay?" he asked, voice low but steady. Not a question meant to reassure himself. He already knew her skill, but a way to make sure she was aware of his attention. Bella nodded, though her hand brushed nervously against the side of her horse. "I've handled worse," she said, but the tightness in her jaw betrayed her. Her eyes flicked to the horizon, then back to him, assessing his posture and his expression. She felt a surge of gratitude for his calm, for the way his presence seemed to create a bubble of control in the chaos of the desert. Caleb adjusted his own saddle, scanning the canyon edges, noting every ridge and shadow. He ran through possibilities. The deputy's men might set up an ambush at the next pass. They could be waiting for them at the river crossing, or they could retreat, leaving the town to stew in its own gossip. He weighed options silently: push ahead, circle wide, or find temporary shelter. His mind moved in tactical patterns he had practiced for years, each decision made with careful calculation. The desert sun dipped lower, and the wind shifted, carrying a faint scent of smoke from a distant settlement. Caleb noticed the detail immediately. Any smoke could signal movement, a camp, or another threat. He nudged his horse slightly faster, keeping Bella close. Her horse moved with confidence, but her eyes darted to every ridge, every shadow. He sensed the flicker of fear behind her composure, not fear of him, but fear of the unknown, fear of danger, fear of what would happen if they were discovered. He recognized it as the same fear he had lived with in battlefields and lawless towns. They reached a narrow canyon where a cluster of rocks provided shelter from both the wind and any wandering eyes. Caleb dismounted first, scanning the perimeter. Every detail mattered: loose rocks that could give away movement, the faint impression of hoofprints, the direction of the wind carrying sound. Bella followed, hands steady on the reins but tension evident in her posture. She observed him as he moved, recognizing in his methodical movements the kind of control that calmed her own rising panic. Once the horses were secured, Caleb started a small fire with practiced hands, using dry kindling from the sparse brush. He kept his movements quiet, methodical, aware that every sound could carry. Bella watched him, chest still tight, the adrenaline from the ride still thrumming through her veins. She leaned slightly closer, careful not to startle him. He noticed the motion and met her gaze briefly, just enough to acknowledge it without breaking focus. "We need to stay alert," he said. His tone was calm, but there was an edge. He didn't want her panicking, but he also didn't want her complacent. "I know," she said, exhaling slowly. She moved to kneel by the fire, adjusting the blanket around her shoulders. The close quarters of the firelight, the crackling noise, and the shared silence created a tension neither of them had expected. Her shoulder brushed his accidentally as she shifted slightly closer to the warmth. Caleb's hand twitched, just slightly, as though measuring the contact, and he didn't pull away. For a long moment, neither spoke. The silence carried its own weight, filled with unspoken questions and unacknowledged feelings. Then Caleb's voice broke the stillness, low and measured. "I wasn't always a sheriff," he said. "I've done things, in my past. Things I'm not proud of. Bella didn't speak immediately. She let the firelight flicker across his face, noting the faint lines at his eyes, the subtle tension in his jaw, the way his hands rested lightly on his knees. "We all have our pasts," she said finally. "Doesn't mean we can't make choices now." Her voice was steady, but she felt the truth of it in her chest. He looked at her then, really looked, and saw the strength in her eyes, the resilience she had to maintain every day in a town that would judge her for nothing more than who she was. He felt a surge of empathy, of protective instinct, but also something else, an awareness of her presence that made his chest tighten in a way he hadn't felt in years. A hand brushed against her sleeve as he reached for a small piece of leather to adjust the firewood. Their fingers met briefly, accidental but deliberate enough to register. Neither pulled away immediately. The contact was grounding, a confirmation that they were both here, alive, and aware of the danger around them. Bella felt a subtle rush of warmth, a mixture of fear, relief, and curiosity about him. She realized in that moment how much she trusted him, not just for survival, but in the knowledge that he understood what it was to carry the constant weight of responsibility and risk. Caleb met her gaze for a second longer, then nodded slightly. No words were needed. They both understood the unspoken agreement. They would get through this together, aware of the danger, aware of each other, aware of the fragile bond forming in the desert night. The fire crackled between them, small and contained, a fragile point of light in the wide, harsh desert. Neither moved closer yet, but the energy in the space was undeniable, tension hanging in every glance, every accidental brush of hands. Caleb's mind stayed sharp. Every movement, every sound beyond the canyon, was catalogued. He knew the deputy's men could be anywhere. Yet at the same time, he allowed himself the smallest moment of acknowledgement. The woman beside him was not just someone to protect. She was someone he wanted to understand, to know, and to keep safe, even as he navigated the endless unknown of the desert night. The first light of dawn barely cut through the morning haze over Redridge. Dust clung to every surface, settling on wooden boards and the edges of wagons parked along the street. Horses shifted in their stalls, snorting and stamping, the occasional metallic jingle of a harness echoing in the quiet. Caleb's eyes swept the street from the second-floor window of the sheriff's office. His jaw was tight, muscles coiled, body primed for immediate action. He counted heads in the distance, 3 figures moving toward the edge of town, shadows long in the soft light. He recognized the posture of men used to confrontation, hands brushing gun handles, movements measured, waiting for hesitation. His chest tightened. This was different from the controlled threat of the alley. Out here, every second mattered. He ran scenarios in his head, calculating cover, exit points, possible angles, and Bella's position. He felt the familiar surge of tension, the readiness for violence, the instinct to protect, the awareness that one misstep could be fatal. He found her crouched behind a wagon across the street, eyes wide, fingers pressed against the wood as if it could hold her still. Her breath was rapid, almost imperceptible, and he saw the rise and fall of her shoulders with each intake. She was tense, aware of every sound, every movement, every potential threat. "Stay low," he whispered through the open window, voice controlled. Even in the quiet, he knew it would carry. "Don't move unless I tell you." She nodded slightly, though the tremor in her hands betrayed her fear. Her gaze flicked to the approaching men, then back to him. Caleb saw it, that moment of internal calculation where she assessed danger, her mind racing through the best way to survive, to act without drawing attention. He respected it. She wasn't reckless. A gunshot cracked through the air, startling in the morning stillness. Caleb reacted instantly, shoulder tightening as he pressed his own firearm against the window frame. His mind broke down each action, target acquisition, wind direction, distance, timing. He had done this before, and yet the presence of Bella below, so close and vulnerable, made every decision sharper, heavier. Bella pressed herself closer to the wagon, feeling the vibration of the street in her knees. Her heart pounded. She had been in danger before, but nothing had carried the weight of responsibility like this. She knew she couldn't panic. If she froze, she could die, or worse, draw the attacker's attention toward Caleb. Every muscle in her body tensed, ready to move on instinct, but also listening, calculating, aware. Another shot rang out. Dust kicked up near her boots, and she flinched. Caleb's voice cut through the commotion, steady and firm. "No. Move behind the saloon." She ran, boots hitting the boards in a quick rhythm, adrenaline surging, every glance toward the advancing men an assessment of risk. Caleb followed immediately, firing over her shoulder to keep the attackers at bay. Each shot was deliberate, measured. His calm contrasted with the chaos, providing a framework she could rely on even in fear. They ducked into a back room of the saloon, breath ragged, hearts racing. Bella pressed herself against the wall, hand against the floor, listening to the footsteps and shouts outside. Fear churned in her stomach, tight and real. She was alive, but barely. Her pulse was loud in her ears. She could feel Caleb's presence beside her, his arm brushing hers as he crouched, body coiled like a spring. "You okay?" he asked, low, eyes scanning the thin sliver of street visible through the cracks in the shutters. His hand hovered near hers, not touching yet, but present, anchoring. I think so," she said, voice barely above a whisper. The words felt inadequate. She wanted to say more, wanted to acknowledge the fear, the relief, the pull she felt toward him, but there wasn't time. The threat was still out there. Caleb nodded once, eyes never leaving the shutters. "Keep your back to me. Don't peek. They'll shoot if they see movement." His voice was calm, clinical, but inside, his mind was running through every potential outcome, noting each possible failure point. He felt a flash of anger, at the attackers, at the town that allowed hatred to fester, but he pushed it down, focusing on survival. The minutes stretched. Every distant sound, the creak of wood, a cough, the metallic jingle of a spur, made both of them flinch. Fear sharpened their awareness. Every muscle was alert, every nerve ready. Yet in the tension, there was another sensation, a subtle acknowledgement of proximity. The way her shoulder brushed his when they adjusted their positions, the way he leaned slightly toward her to shield her view. Small, almost accidental touches, but loaded with the unspoken understanding of mutual dependence. Finally, the attackers retreated, realizing they had underestimated Caleb and the town's defenses. Caleb lowered his gun slowly, but he didn't relax completely. He could still feel the surge of adrenaline in his veins, the sharp awareness of mortality, the relief that she was unharmed. Bella exhaled, leaning back against him slightly as she allowed herself a fraction of relief. She could feel the tension in her body start to ease, replaced by a residual hum of energy, the mingling of fear, survival, and something she couldn't yet name that was growing between them. Caleb glanced at her, noting the sweat on her forehead, the slight tremor in her hands. He felt a surge of protective instinct, stronger than ever, but also something more personal, a desire to ensure she was safe, that she could breathe without fear in his presence. His hand brushed against hers briefly as he handed her a water flask. It was small, almost imperceptible, but it carried reassurance, grounding, and a hint of connection. For the first time that morning, she met his gaze without flinching. In that look, she understood what he had already conveyed through action. He had her back, he respected her strength, and he wasn't afraid. And in the quiet that followed the chaos, both of them recognized it. Danger had drawn them closer, sharpened their awareness of each other, and made every fleeting touch, every glance, every shared breath heavier with unspoken meaning. The town of Redridge woke slowly under a pale sun, the streets quiet except for the occasional creak of a wagon wheel or the clip of boots on wooden sidewalks. Caleb Thorne walked with measured steps past the general store and the blacksmith, eyes scanning faces. The previous day's gunfight had left ripples through the town, some whispered in admiration, others in fear, most in judgment. He noticed it immediately, the subtle narrowing of eyes, the half-smiles that didn't reach the lips, the way conversations stopped when he approached. The townsfolk were curious, but curiosity in Redridge had a dangerous edge. Caleb felt the familiar knot of awareness tighten in his chest. He couldn't control their opinions, but he could control his movements, and he could protect Bella if they crossed paths. Bella appeared at the saloon doorway as he turned the corner. She moved with her usual careful confidence, skirt brushing the steps, boots scuffing lightly on the worn wood. She paused when she saw him, her dark eyes meeting his for the briefest second. The flash of awareness in her gaze told him she had sensed the undercurrents, the whispers, the judgment, the stares that followed her as she walked. He approached her slowly, mindful of the distance. He didn't want to draw attention, but he also didn't want her walking these streets alone while he was aware of potential threats. "Morning," he said quietly, nodding toward the alley that led behind the saloon. She inclined her head slightly, the tension in her shoulders easing just a fraction as she moved toward the alley with him. Her pulse still carried the memory of yesterday's gunfight, the adrenaline leaving a faint buzz under her skin. Every step was careful, but every step toward Caleb carried a subtle awareness of proximity, the brush of a sleeve, the way his shoulder aligned with hers, the unspoken promise of protection. The alley was narrow, enclosed by old brick walls with peeling paint. Trash littered the ground, the smell faint but present. Caleb's eyes scanned the entrance, then the shadows, noting possible eavesdroppers or attackers. He felt the familiar tight coil of readiness in his chest. "No one should be following," he said, voice low. "But stay close." Bella nodded, hands gripping her skirts as she shifted closer to him, careful but deliberate. The weight of the town's judgment pressed on her, heavy and constant, but she allowed herself this moment, brief, hidden, safe. Her mind flickered through the gossip she had already heard, the whispers about her heritage, about her daring, about the gunfight. She felt the sting, but she also felt the small thrill of defiance, standing next to him, unseen, unjudged. Caleb turned slightly, eyes catching hers. There was a long, quiet moment where neither spoke. His gaze was calm, authoritative, but there was an edge, a flicker of awareness, of calculation. He noticed her hand brushing against the folds of her skirt and the way her dark hair fell partially across her face. He felt a pull, subtle but undeniable, and recognized it immediately. The tension between them had shifted from survival to something more personal. Bella began, then stopped. She wasn't sure how to articulate the mixture of relief, gratitude, and something she didn't fully name. Her pulse quickened in the quiet alley. Her fingers twitched slightly as she adjusted her shawl, conscious of him, conscious of proximity, conscious of how every movement seemed to matter more in his presence. Caleb's lips tightened slightly. He understood the hesitation, the careful control. "You don't need to explain," he said softly. His voice carried authority, but also reassurance. "Just stay aware." The words, simple as they were, settled some of the tension. Bella exhaled quietly, leaning just enough toward him to feel the warmth radiating from his shoulder. She didn't touch him intentionally, but the proximity was undeniable. She felt her chest tighten, not fear, not danger, but awareness of the connection forming in the quiet, hidden space of the alley. They moved closer to a wooden crate stacked against the wall, creating a small corner shielded from the street. Caleb leaned slightly against the wall, scanning outward while still keeping his body angled toward her. Bella mirrored his careful posture, knees bent, weight shifted, hands steady. They were silent, but the quiet was charged, an electric tension born of unspoken understanding, proximity, and the knowledge that discovery would bring danger. Her dark eyes met his again, and in that gaze, she sensed the awareness behind his calm. He wasn't just protecting her from the town or the threats lingering outside. He was aware of her presence, aware of how the brush of a sleeve or the tilt of her head could carry meaning. She felt it too, a subtle, unacknowledged pull, intensified by the necessity of secrecy. Caleb shifted slightly, enough that his arm brushed hers lightly, not intrusive, not deliberate, but deliberate enough to communicate. "I'm here. I see you. You're safe." Bella's chest tightened at the contact, her pulse quickening, her mind racing through both the fear of exposure and the intensity of feeling that this moment brought. "Do you come here often?" he asked quietly, a hint of wryness in his tone, but eyes alert, still scanning shadows and corners. She gave a small, controlled laugh, the sound low and wary. "Only when I need to be unseen." Her voice carried honesty, a subtle acknowledgment of both fear and strategy. She was strong, capable, but she knew the precariousness of their situation. Caleb nodded, the corner of his mouth twitching slightly in acknowledgment. He felt the weight of proximity, the subtle heat of her presence, the intensity of the moment. His mind was calculating risk as always, but there was a new variable now. This tension, this pull, this unspoken understanding that grew heavier with every second they spent together. A distant sound, a wagon wheel, a shout, pulled them both back to awareness. Caleb's body stiffened instantly, eyes scanning the alley exit, every muscle ready. Bella mirrored him, heart racing, aware of the fragility of their safety. In that instant, the connection between them tightened, reinforced by danger and proximity. And then, as the sound faded, a silence fell over the alley, thick and deliberate. They remained close, not moving, not speaking, aware of the weight of the moment, the shared danger, the shared tension, The first real acknowledgement that their connection had shifted from necessity to something more intimate, more dangerous, and far more compelling. Night had fallen over the outskirts of Redridge, casting the desert in near-total darkness. Only the faint light of the half-moon illuminated the scrub and rocks, and the stars were distant, cold points in the sky. Caleb guided his horse along a narrow trail, every hoofstep measured, ears alert to the faintest sound, a rustle of brush, the creak of a branch, the shifting of the wind. Bella followed behind, holding the reins tightly, boots pressing into the stirrups. Her breath came in slow, controlled pulls, but her pulse throbbed in time with every shift in shadows. She was tense, aware of both the open desert and Caleb's proximity. The silence between them was heavy, not uncomfortable, but charged, an awareness of danger, of proximity, of unspoken feelings pressing against the edge of what was acceptable. Caleb's senses were sharpened. He could feel the change in air, the faint footfalls that didn't belong to their horses, the way the darkness hid movement perfectly. His hand rested lightly near his holster, fingers brushing the leather as if anticipating action. Every step, every sound, was catalogued, evaluated. His mind ran scenarios, possible attackers, escape routes, cover points. His chest tightened with a familiar mixture of adrenaline and responsibility. "You think they followed us out here?" Bella whispered, voice low enough to be carried away by the wind. Caleb's jaw tightened. "It's possible," he said quietly. His eyes scanned the brush to the left, then the rocks ahead. "We're not safe until we get clear of this trail. Keep your eyes sharp, and don't make sudden movements." Bella nodded, gripping the reins so tightly her knuckles were white. Fear knotted her stomach, but it was tempered by trust. She trusted him to act decisively, to shield her if needed. Her mind catalogued the landscape, the rocks that could provide cover, the slight slope where they might gain better visibility. She felt the tension of being responsible for her own survival, yet comforted by the certainty of his presence beside her. A low murmur reached them, a shuffle of boots across gravel, and Caleb froze instantly. He gestured for Bella to dismount quietly, moving her behind a large boulder that offered partial cover. His eyes scanned the darkness, every muscle coiled. The unknown threat could be anyone, one of the deputy's men, a curious townsfolk, or a bandit seeking opportunity. Caleb's hand rested on Bella's arm briefly, a subtle anchor. "Stay still. Breathe," he said, voice steady, almost soothing, though his chest throbbed with awareness. Her body responded instinctively, pressing slightly into his side, trusting him, feeling the weight of his calm authority. From the shadows, 3 figures emerged, cautiously advancing. Caleb stepped slightly forward, gun in hand, eyes locked. His mind processed every detail: the distance, the angle of attack, the possible trajectories, and the risk to Bella. His heart was steady outwardly, but inside, a fierce tension hummed: fear for her safety, calculation for survival, anticipation for the confrontation. "Step forward," one of the figures demanded, voice low and tense. The words carried threat, testing them. Caleb's jaw hardened. "You don't want this," he said, voice calm but firm, deliberate. Every syllable was measured, carrying authority that drew on both his experience and instinct. "Back off now, and no one gets hurt." The figures hesitated. Bella's pulse raced. She could feel Caleb's body behind her, a taut barrier of muscle and awareness. Her fingers twitched near the folds of her skirt, almost unconsciously brushing against him. His presence grounded her, but also magnified her awareness of how close he was, how protective, how alive with attention. The standoff stretched, tension so thick they both felt it in every breath. One of the men stepped forward aggressively, and Caleb's hand moved to his gun with practiced speed, ready to draw. A second man faltered, realizing Caleb's readiness was lethal. The third shifted, uncertainty evident. Caleb's calm, coiled authority forced them to reconsider, and they retreated slowly into the shadows, disappearing without a shot fired. Caleb exhaled, slowly, shoulders relaxing slightly, though his eyes remained vigilant. He turned to Bella, brushing a lock of hair from her face, his hand lingering just long enough to communicate both reassurance and the unspoken tension building between them. "You okay?" he asked, tone low, careful. Bella nodded, heart still racing, pulse thrumming in her ears. She could feel the heat of his hand against her cheek, the weight of his gaze, and the slow awareness of the desire simmering beneath the surface. "I am now," she whispered, voice shaky but deliberate, allowing the acknowledgement of both fear and relief. Caleb studied her, noting the tension still clinging to her shoulders, the flush on her cheeks. His chest tightened slightly, the protective instinct mingling with the awareness that this was more than mere survival. It was proximity, connection, and something neither wanted to acknowledge fully yet. He gestured toward the horses. "We keep moving. A little further, then we can rest." They rode in silence for a while, side by side. The moonlight cast their shadows long and thin across the desert sand. Each small movement, the way her boot brushed his leg, the slight tilt of her shoulder toward him, carried weight. Each glance exchanged was measured, loaded with awareness, desire, and the shared thrill of surviving danger together. Eventually, they reached a small outcrop of rocks providing shelter and a sense of seclusion. Caleb dismounted first, quickly checking the perimeter. Satisfied, he motioned for Bella to come closer. She did, heart hammering, aware of the intimacy the darkness allowed. He crouched near her, hands close but not intrusive, eyes meeting hers. The fire they built was small, casting flickering shadows that danced across their faces. The silence between them was heavy with awareness. Without words, Caleb shifted slightly, enough that their shoulders brushed. Bella didn't pull away. He spoke quietly, low enough that only she could hear. "You were calm out there. I knew I could count on you." Her lips parted slightly, and she felt the tension in her chest deepen. "I trust you," she said softly, the words more deliberate than any previous acknowledgement. Caleb's eyes softened. He reached out slowly, brushing a stray lock of hair from her forehead, thumb resting lightly against her temple. Bella leaned into the touch for the briefest instant, breath-catching. Neither spoke again. Words weren't needed. The weight of proximity, the tension of the day, the shared survival, and the intimacy of darkness carried the meaning. They sat in that quiet, side by side, hearts still racing from the confrontation, but slowly the adrenaline eased, replaced by something heavier, more personal: awareness, desire, trust. Every accidental brush of a hand, every shared glance, every measured breath reinforced the growing connection between them, deepened by danger and secrecy, charged with an unspoken promise that neither wanted to acknowledge fully yet. The streets of Redridge were nearly empty, the sun beating down on the wooden sidewalks and wagon wheels, casting harsh, unflinching light on every board and dust mote. Caleb Thorne stood outside the sheriff's office, hands resting lightly on his gun belt, boots planted firmly on the sun-scorched planks. His eyes scanned the main street from end to end, noting every shadow, every shift of dust, every possible cover the approaching man could use. Today wasn't just about the law anymore. It was about proving to the town, and to himself, that fear and prejudice wouldn't dictate who survived or who deserved protection. He could feel the weight of every citizen's gaze, even if no one dared approach. Rumors had already spread about his association with Bella Marquez, half Mexican, half white, a saloon singer whose voice carried both defiance and sharp wit. Every whisper fueled suspicion, every stare carried judgment, and he knew the next confrontation could ignite more than just gunfire. He heard footsteps behind him and turned briefly. Bella had arrived, skirt brushing the boards as she moved, boots dusty from errands and careful travel. Her eyes were alert, scanning the street as if she were measuring danger in every breath. She kept her distance, knowing the town's eyes would scrutinize every interaction, but her presence grounded him in a way that nothing else could. "You shouldn't be here," Caleb said, voice low but firm, careful to keep it civil in case anyone overheard. "I'm not going anywhere," she replied quietly. Her dark eyes met his, steady and determined, betraying no fear despite the tension. He noted the slight tension in her jaw, the set of her shoulders, and the careful way she shifted her weight. She was strong, but he could sense the undercurrent of fear, fear for herself, fear for him, and fear of the town's reaction. Caleb's eyes returned to the street as the figure approached. The man was tall, broad-shouldered, with a gun glinting in the sunlight and a swagger born of overconfidence. Every step he took toward Caleb was deliberate, meant to intimidate, meant to provoke. Caleb's jaw tightened. He had faced many such men before, but the stakes were higher now. This duel would test not just skill with a weapon, but control, restraint, and survival under scrutiny. Bella's hands clenched at her sides, the shawl around her shoulders shifting slightly with tension. She didn't want to witness a gunfight, but she needed to be there, needed to see the stakes, the courage, and the man she trusted. She felt the heat of fear mingled with admiration, the pull of something deeper that had been growing steadily since the desert ride, the ambush, the hidden alley. Caleb stepped forward, boots crunching softly on the dirt. He kept his hand near his gun, not aggressive but ready. His mind catalogued every detail, the man's posture, the sun's glare, the possible angles for movement or cover. He noted Bella's position, close enough to offer him strength without exposing her to unnecessary danger. His chest tightened with tension, but his breathing remained controlled, deliberate. He relied on training, experience, and instinct to guide his next moves. The man stopped, measuring Caleb with a slow, deliberate gaze. "Heard you've been keeping company with Marquez," he said, voice low, edged with menace. "Think the law'll let that slide?" Caleb didn't answer immediately. He studied the man's stance, the glint of sunlight on his revolver. His mind weighed options: draw and risk immediate violence, defuse verbally, or wait for a tactical advantage. Every second counted. He felt the familiar tight coil of fear and anticipation in his chest, not for himself, but for Bella. The knowledge that her reputation and safety were entangled with this confrontation sharpened his focus. "You shouldn't have come here," Caleb said finally, voice steady. "Back off, or I will stop you." The man laughed, a low, mean sound, and drew his gun. Time slowed. Caleb's heart thudded in rhythm with the approaching inevitability of action. Every instinct screamed readiness. Bella's breath caught in her throat, hand pressing briefly against the edge of her skirt as she watched, her pulse racing with fear and a strange, taut awareness of Caleb's presence. The duel began with precise, measured movements. Caleb's hand moved to his revolver with practiced speed, eyes locked on the target, muscles coiled for action. Every shot fired, every slight movement, was catalogued instantly, evaluated for danger and opportunity. Adrenaline surged through his body, sharp and focused, heightening awareness. Bella's body reacted instinctively. She shifted slightly, moving just enough to maintain cover while keeping sight of him. Fear mingled with admiration, pulse racing, awareness of the brush of wind, the dust kicked up by boots, the glint of metal in sunlight. She had never felt vulnerability and power so intensely at once. The gunfight was brief but tense. Caleb's calm precision allowed him to disarm and subdue the man without unnecessary violence. Every breath was measured, every movement deliberate. He felt relief, but it was tempered by awareness. This town was still watching, and danger could return at any moment. When the threat was neutralized, Caleb turned slowly toward Bella. She met his gaze, breath still uneven, eyes wide with a mixture of fear and something else, something deeper, unspoken. He approached her, heels on dusty boards, movements deliberate, grounded. "Are you hurt?" he asked, voice low, steady. His eyes scanned her for signs of trauma, tension, or fear. "No," she whispered, chest still heaving. Relief and adrenaline lingered, mingling with a growing awareness of his nearness. "I'm fine." He stepped closer, hand brushing a stray lock of hair from her face, lingering just enough to communicate presence, reassurance, and something more. Her breath caught. She could feel the warmth of his body, the controlled strength in his stance, the way he carried authority without aggression. The street seemed to shrink around them, every noise muted, every judgment suspended in the charged space between them. She allowed herself to lean slightly toward him, drawn by proximity and trust, aware of the tension in every glance, every brush of hands, every subtle movement. Caleb's chest tightened, protective instinct mingling with something he hadn't let surface before, a pull toward her, a recognition of desire tempered by respect and awareness of danger. He kept his hand near hers, brushing her fingers lightly, not intrusive, but deliberate, confirming the bond that had grown stronger through danger, secrecy, and survival. They stood in the street, breathing unevenly, the duel over, the threat gone, yet the tension between them unresolved, heavier than ever. It was a silent acknowledgment. In this town, danger and prejudice would never fully disappear, but the connection they shared had become undeniable, grounded in shared fear, trust, and the slow, deliberate building of something impossible yet inevitable. The first light of dawn stretched across Redridge, turning the dusty streets into a harsh palette of ochre and pale gray. Caleb Thorne stood in the middle of the main street, boots pressed into the dirt, gun at his hip, eyes scanning the horizon. His jaw was set, muscles taut, and every fiber of his body alert. The town had been on edge since the duel the day before, rumors spreading faster than the wind. Today, everything would be tested: the law, the town's prejudices, and the fragile trust he and Bella had built. Caleb's thoughts were precise, practical. He had assessed the situation in every way possible: potential troublemakers, escape routes, reinforcements, and the position of townsfolk likely to intervene or obstruct. Each decision carried weight. One wrong move could not only endanger him but also Bella. He flexed his fingers near the holster, steadying his breathing, while his mind catalogued contingencies. From the edge of the street, he spotted Bella emerging from the saloon doorway. Her boots scuffed the wooden planks lightly, her skirt brushing the boards, her shawl draped neatly over one shoulder. Her face was pale from tension, eyes alert. Caleb felt a protective surge tighten his chest. She had chosen to be here despite the danger, and he acknowledged it with a small, almost imperceptible nod. "Stay close," he said quietly, voice low but firm. "No one gets to you without me knowing." She nodded, heart hammering, aware of both the threat in the street and the unspoken intensity between them. Her pulse raced, not only from fear but from the tension that had been building since the ambush in the desert, the hidden alley, and the duel. Every glance at Caleb reminded her how grounded he was, how deliberate, and how aware of her presence at every step. The first sound of conflict came from the north end of the street: voices raised, a scuffle of boots, and the metallic clang of weapons being readied. Caleb moved with deliberate precision, stepping slightly in front of Bella, his hand hovering near the revolver. His body was calm, but inside, his heart throbbed with controlled tension. He catalogued positions, shadows, and likely aggressors while maintaining his posture as a shield for her. A small group of townsfolk emerged from behind shutters and doors, some carrying pistols, others simply emboldened by rumor and prejudice. Their leader, a grizzled man with a crooked hat and a hard glare, stepped forward. "Thorn, we're tired of seeing you meddle. And her, she doesn't belong here." His voice was sharp, venomous. Caleb's eyes narrowed. He measured every detail: distance, body language, weapons, possible movement. His mind raced, calculating both defense and control. His hand rested lightly on the gun, a clear warning. "I protect this town and the law. No one has the right to threaten anyone, least of all her," he said, voice calm but firm, authoritative. Every syllable deliberate, intended to halt escalation without unnecessary violence. Bella's stomach tightened. She felt fear ripple through her, but also trust in Caleb's judgment. She instinctively shifted closer to him, aware of his steady presence, aware that he would act if necessary. She noted the subtle tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw set, the control in his movements, all signs he was ready to act decisively. The leader laughed, stepping closer, pistols raised. "We decide who belongs here." Caleb's mind moved faster than the eye could follow. He calculated reaction, angle, timing, and consequence. His fingers tightened on the revolver. He didn't move first. He never did without certainty, but his gaze locked on the aggressor with an intensity that held the room in pause. The other men faltered under the weight of his attention. Bella felt the tension radiate from him. Her pulse raced, fear and anticipation entwined. She had learned to trust his instincts, to read his readiness, to know that he would not falter. Her hands trembled slightly as she pressed them together, aware of how every subtle movement carried meaning. Then, a sudden movement from the group, a gun drawn too quickly, triggered Caleb's response. He moved with precision, disarming the nearest aggressor, his actions controlled, exact, leaving no room for escalation. The others froze, assessing both his skill and the risk of engaging. Caleb's calm, deliberate control over the situation was enough to force a retreat. One by one, the townsfolk lowered their weapons, muttering under their breaths, leaving the street silent again except for the wind and the distant crow of a rooster. Caleb exhaled slowly, keeping his eyes on the retreating figures until they disappeared entirely. His chest still hummed with the residue of adrenaline, but his mind was already cataloguing the aftermath, checking on Bella, assessing the town's mood, and confirming that no immediate danger remained. Bella stepped forward cautiously, boots crunching lightly on the dirt. She stopped beside him, exhaling a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her chest was still tight from fear, but it was tempered by relief. She glanced up at him, and he met her gaze immediately. His eyes were steady, warm, but tinged with exhaustion. "You okay?" he asked quietly, voice low enough to carry reassurance without attracting attention. "I am," she whispered, voice soft yet firm. She could feel the lingering tension in her own muscles, the rapid thrum of her heartbeat, the raw awareness of their closeness. She shifted slightly toward him, not for protection alone, but because the day's trials had revealed a bond that went beyond mere survival. Caleb's hand brushed hers lightly, deliberate and measured. The contact was small, almost imperceptible, but it carried significance, protection, acknowledgement, and the unspoken weight of connection. She didn't pull away. Instead, she let herself lean into the touch, eyes locking with his. For the first time, there was no fear of being judged or discovered, only the quiet certainty of trust, respect, and growing desire. The sun climbed higher, illuminating Redridge in its harsh light, exposing dust, imperfections, and the small gathering of onlookers peering from windows. Yet the tension between Caleb and Bella made the rest of the town fade away. The danger had passed. Prejudice had not disappeared, but they had proven, decisively, that their bond, and their right to be together, was not to be ignored. Caleb stepped slightly closer, voice low but steady. "This town will still whisper. It will still judge. But we've faced them together." Bella nodded, hand brushing lightly against his forearm, feeling the warmth and the controlled strength beneath. "Together," she repeated. The word carried commitment, trust, and something deeper she had felt growing since the first glance across the saloon. For the first time in Redridge, they allowed themselves a quiet moment of closeness in public, hands brushing, eyes meeting, a brief, lingering smile shared. The town could look, could whisper, but it could not undo what had formed between them, a partnership forged in danger, loyalty, and defiance, grounded in mutual respect and undeniable attraction. As the morning sun fully rose, Caleb and Bella walked together toward the edge of town, side by side, boots kicking up dust. Every step was deliberate, confident, and private in its intimacy. They were still aware of the world around them, still conscious of the social lines they had crossed, but the fear and tension of prior days had shifted into something stronger: certainty, trust, and the quiet knowledge that they had earned the right to be together. The street was empty, the town slowly stirring, but Caleb and Bella had moved beyond judgment. Every glance, every brush of hands, every step forward confirmed what they had risked and gained: a love that survived danger, defied prejudice, and finally, could exist without fear. This completes the 8-chapter arc, ending with a full, earned resolution. The town acknowledges their presence, danger has passed, and Caleb and Bella share a quiet, intimate moment signaling both romance and mutual respect.